Patriots and Steelers. Classic matchup between formerly and for a long time two of the best teams in the AFC. Certainly not the case this year, but big time defensive battle we got going on here. So this Patriots offense was absolutely horrible in week one. To what should have been the surprise of no one, as I talked about in that preview video, this team is in a really tough spot offensively. A lot of that due to the ability or lack thereof of their quarterback. The Steelers' defense, on the other hand, was absolutely incredible in week one, forced a ton of turnovers, and kept an offense that, while they did go through some injuries and changes from last year in that game in the Bengals, to a really low total and played really, really well. So how do they match up in this game? Well, it's not great for the Patriots here, right? So on the offensive line, we have normally what would be an okay run blocking line that I don't trust a whole lot in this game. Cole Strange looked whatever in his first game. He certainly wasn't bad or horrible, but wasn't particularly impressive. Not somebody I'm going to count as a positive in his second game going to the NFL here. And these other guys, while normally I think they're okay, this Steelers front is just dominant. They were incredible against the Bengals, especially in the run game. Now they are missing T.J. Watt, which absolutely matters, of course. But between Larry Ogunjobi, Tyson Alualu, and Cam Hayward, you're still talking about one of the absolute best trios in the league. They have depth in Chris Wormley and Montravius Adams that are still pretty good. And on the edges, Alex Highsmith has proven to be a pretty high-end run defender, and Malik Reed too. He's not incredible about it. Those guys are all good, and while I think Trent Brown especially is good enough at times to push back and counter that some, it's not very much. So I don't think this Patriots team is going to be able to run the ball really very well at all. At which point you're leaning on Mac Jones throwing into this crazy Steelers defensive scheme, and I just don't expect that to go well in the slightest. Now, quarterbacks all work really uniquely. They work differently when they play against the Ravens and Steelers. There's two. If a quarterback can have success against one, a lot of times they'll have success against the other because they play with way different rules from the rest of the NFL, but really different or really similar rules to each other as far as how they drop guys into coverage, how they throw these crazy zone blitzes, how they change up coverages on the back end and a lot of zone. Ravens are more man-oriented, but it ends up looking really similar. And Mac Jones has yet to play those two teams, but I got to say I have little to no faith that it's going to go well. Mac Jones is just, at this point, he's proven to not be able to process NFL defenses at all, despite that for some reason being his kind of reputation. He really struggles to push the ball down the field into good situations. He straight up misses open receivers kind of a lot. And he gets really, really skittish under pressure. And I'm really worried about in this game because even without TJ Watt, you are talking about a Steelers team that is going to be able to rush the passer, that is going to throw a lot of blitzes, that fuck with this Patriots offensive line. You have individual winners, especially between Tyson Alualu and Cam Hayward on the interior against Michael Onwenu and Cole Strange, who both have shown to be kind of vulnerable to really good interior pass rushers. I love David Andrews, of course, but from center you can only do so much. And on the edges, Alex Highsmith, like I said, he's not amazing as a pass rusher, but he's good enough, especially with Isaiah Wynn just kind of being a whatever, middle of the pack at best tackle. You can find some wins there. And Malik Reed, actually, kind of really similar player, to be honest with you, in really similar situations. So there is some pass rush here. And as far as winning down the field, yeah, I don't think these Steelers corners are particularly good. Levi Wallace is fine, but Ahkello Witherspoon has been really bad before in his career. Cam Sutton, whatever. They don't ask them to play, one-on-one man coverage with these Patriots wide receivers. So you're talking about guys, you need guys who are going to win in underneath zones really consistently and then be able to take that and turn it into bigger plays. The Patriots have the first half of that, for sure. I like Jacoby Myers and Kendrick Bourne a lot as far as guys who can win on the underneath routes, even in this game. But both of those guys really don't have the after-the-catch ability compared to the real explosive weapons across the NFL that you need to generate a lot of offense against the Steelers. And Devontae Parker and Nelson Aguilar, while I think they both have their strengths, those guys actually are a bit limited by Levi Wallace, by Cam Sutton, as they get down the field. And like I said, with Mac Jones having to deliver the ball, I'm worried about it. I love Henry as a player, but Devin Bush and Miles Jack are really, really good from the linebacker spot in coverage. Minka Fitzpatrick, of course, was one of the best defensive players in all of football in week one, has been a really good player for a long time. So you just, when you look at this Patriots offense, you just really struggle to see any ways that they can win. Now, I will say, like I mentioned, that sometimes there are unique circumstances with the Steelers and Ravens, and some quarterbacks just understand it or work okay into it. Maybe that is the case with Mac Jones, but I'm going to have to see that to believe it. So otherwise, I just don't see any way they can consistently succeed or push the ball down the field outside of some really, really goofy circumstances. So I have them at 9 to 16 points. Not a very good day. So can the Steelers offense clear that? Well, in week one, they're also pretty bad, benefited from a lot of luck and turnovers and good field, and still didn't exactly do a whole lot with it. But that Bengals defense is really good, is really talented. And while Mitch Trubisky sucks still, there were at least actually some okay things in the way he played through the Steelers offense in week one that I think against the worst defenses will end up with a little tiny bit more success. I don't expect anything very good, but it's not the worst thing in the world, right? This Patriots defense, they also weren't all that good in week one. They were fine for sure, and I still like Belichick as a coach and everything, and they did some good things, but they benefited from playing Tua. It was not very good if he wasn't throwing the ball directly to Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle. So there are some definitely some holes on this team, right? So how do they match up? Well, this Steelers run game first is not good. It's just not going to be good all year. They don't do it very well. They don't scheme it very well, and their offensive line is not built to do so. In this game, I will say, though, especially at guard between Kevin Dotson and James Daniels, those guys can show some push to the line of scrimmage. And for as strong as Lawrence Guy, Devon Godchaux, and Christian Barmore are, none of those guys are really like elite players or all that high end. Lawrence Guy is pretty good, and Christian Barmore could penetrate and stuff for sure, but it's not necessarily to the level that you need to be amazing. And Matthew Judon is really good as an edge defender, but it's kind of it. And these Patriots linebackers, I don't know what their obsession is with Jawan Bentley. It doesn't work out very well a lot of times. Adrian, he's just so slow is the whole point. He's really good between the guards, but that's about where his usefulness is. And then there are other spots, Adrian Phillips, whatever, Mac Wilson, he plays, whatever. Like, there's a chance that Steelers can move the ball just a little bit on the ground for them. Again, I don't expect anything crazy, but enough that it is a viable-ish threat. Through the air, though, I think it's interesting because while I just kind of roasted the Steelers' offensive line in the run game, and I should say Mason Cole absolutely horrible at center still, in the pass game and pass protection, they probably match up kind of okay in this game. Like I said, those guards aren't bad. I actually like both those players, and while Christian Barmore I think can win some, it's nothing that I'm really all that scared of. And at tackle, Dan Moore and Jukuma Okorafor especially, I think are pretty positive players in pass protection, Okorafor specifically, but while Matthew Judon is good enough to beat them sometimes, he has been, for a lot of times in his career, more dependent on the scheme that he's playing and generate a lot of his pressure. And while he can beat tackles at times, I do think he can push Dan Moore into the pocket and he can outstrength him at points. He's not a crazy, good, consistent pass rusher, really. So this Steelers line has a chance to actually be kind of okay here. At which point you're talking about the receivers in these corners, and listen, this Patriots secondary is just not nearly as good as it has been in previous years. Jonathan Jones, the only corner who used to play a lot, that's still here, and while he's still pretty good, these other guys, Jalen Mills, I still have real worries about as an outside corner in the NFL. I think he's way better as a safety and has gotten burned forever on the Eagles. I know he played it kind of okay week one, but I'm still worried about it. Miles Bryant as a slot corner is kind of there, not a particularly impressive player. And these Steelers receivers, specifically Deontay Johnson, are still pretty good. Well, Deontay Johnson especially. He's really good. He's going to beat these Patriots corners with some consistency, and I like that matchup a lot. Chase Claypool, not so much, and I do think the Steelers can do a good job on him. George Pickens didn't show a lot despite the hype going into week one. Now that Steelers second, or the Bengals secondary he played into is pretty good, and Mitch Trubisky, it can kind of make it hard to see how good or bad receivers are in general, just because he never really gets the ball to them in good situations. But I do think there is enough, especially with Deontay Johnson, for there to be kind of some wins down the field. And listen, like I said, this Patriots secondary and just kind of defense overall has just bled so much talent in the last like 3 years that against competent offenses, I kind of struggle. Now, this is not a competent offense with the Steelers, like I said, but I do think there's just enough here that I have some faith in them being able to move the ball at least better than the Patriots can. So I have them at 13 to 20 points. So overall, I do think the Steelers are going to win this game. The Patriots, especially their offense, is just nowhere near good enough, and it's going to struggle. And then you talk about short fields potentially for the Steelers, some things where Mitch Trubisky can, get into field goal range 7 times, and then you win an ugly game. I don't love it because it is Mitch Trubisky. He sucks still. I'd never really feel super strongly about him unless it's a crazy situation. And it is still against Bill Belichick, who, while I lost a lot of faith in over the last couple of years, he's not like the worst in the world. Well, obviously, he's still an incredibly good coach, probably the greatest of all time. But there's some questions there. The over-under, 40.5 is a really low number. Definitely like the under still. There's real issues on both of these offenses. So I do think the Patriots, I felt pretty decent about the Patriots. Got the Dolphins game mostly right. I thought they were going to be actually better than they were, which didn't end up happening. And same thing with the Steelers-Bengals game. I feel pretty decent about both of these teams going into this one, but yeah, I think the Steelers really should win this game, despite for some reason crazily being home underdogs.